Have you ever heard of a war where there were no casualties but 2 soldiers were injured by a bear? Yes, you heard that right. Welcome to the story of the Aroostook War, a conflict so unusual that it defies conventional wisdom about wars and battles. Let's set our time machine to the year 1838. The United States and the United Kingdom find themselves in a bitter dispute. The bone of contention? A border, or more specifically, the border between the New Brunswick colony and the state of Maine. The scenery around this border was breathtaking, but the tranquility was deceptive. Underneath the serene facade, tensions were simmering, and they were about to boil over. In the midst of this beautiful wilderness, there were lumberjacks hard at work, chopping down trees. But here's the catch. Both sides claimed that these lumberjacks were harvesting trees on the wrong side of the border. This turned the simple act of chopping wood into a political act of defiance, a spark that could ignite the powder keg of conflict. And ignite it did. Both sides called out their militias, readying themselves for a confrontation. You might be thinking this is where the bloodshed begins, right? But here's where the Aroostook War takes an unexpected turn. Instead of descending into a violent clash, the issue was settled diplomatically. Yes, you heard it right. A war was averted not by the might of the sword, but by the power of words and negotiations. Now, just when you thought this conflict couldn't get any stranger, let's circle back to the bear. Amidst all this tension, 2 British soldiers were injured not by enemy fire, but by a bear. Ironic, isn't it? In a war that saw no casualties, the only injuries were caused by the local wildlife. So, how did such a peculiar conflict come about? Let's delve deeper into the events. Join us as we journey through the timber disputes, the bear incident, the role of the militias, the diplomatic resolution, and the aftermath of this unique chapter in history. It all began with trees. Yes, you heard it right, trees. Picture this. The year is 1838 and the United States and the United Kingdom are locked in a dispute. But this isn't your typical international conflict, oh no. This is a squabble over timber, a fight over fir trees, a ruckus about redwoods. Lumberjacks, those burly folk with their flannel shirts and axes, found themselves unwittingly at the heart of the dispute. These hard-working men, who were simply trying to make a living, were suddenly thrust into the center of an international incident. You see, both sides of the conflict claimed that these lumberjacks were chopping down trees on the wrong side of the border. Can you imagine being arrested for chopping down a tree in what you thought was your own country? The absurdity of the situation is almost comical. Lumberjacks from both sides were being hauled off by authorities, accused of illicit chopping. And what was their crime? Simply being in the wrong forest at the wrong time, axe in hand. It was as if they were pawns in a game of chess, their fate determined by the invisible line of the border that was, in those days, as clear as mud. And it wasn't just a few isolated incidents. No, this was happening on a grand scale, so much so that the dispute even earned its own name, the Aroostook War. But don't let the term war fool you. There were no battles, no casualties, no fields strewn with fallen soldiers. Instead, there were just a lot of confused lumberjacks, an escalating number of arrests, and a growing pile of chopped wood that no one was quite sure who owned. As tensions over timber escalated, the situation took an even more bizarre turn. But that, dear listeners, is a tale for the next part of our story. For now, let's just marvel at the unique absurdity of a war that was, quite literally, about the wood for the trees. Now, imagine this. 2 soldiers not injured in battle, but by a bear. Sounds like a far-fetched tale from a fantasy novel, right? But in the midst of the Aroostook War, this incident was as real as it could get. You see, the Aroostook War, despite its grand title, was a dispute marked not by the clash of swords or the boom of cannons, but by the rustle of leaves and the chopping of timber. And in this unusual war, the most unusual incident of all was the bear attack. Our story begins with 2 British soldiers, patrolling the disputed border between New Brunswick and Maine. It's a chilly day, and the air is filled with the scent of pine and the promise of snow. Suddenly, the calm forest is shattered by a rustling in the undergrowth. Out of the woods emerges a bear, an imposing creature, its eyes filled with a wild, untamed energy. Now, these soldiers were prepared for American militiamen, not a massive, unpredictable wild animal. The bear, likely startled by their presence, charged. Panicked and unprepared, the soldiers tried to defend themselves. But remember, they were in the bear's territory. The bear, unimpressed with their feeble attempts, swiped at them, leaving them injured. This incident, as bizarre as it was, marked the only instance of injury during the entire Aroostook War. Yes, you heard it right. In a war with no actual warfare, the only casualties were inflicted not by enemy soldiers, but by a bear. It's a testament to the unique nature of this conflict. A war where the greatest threat came not from human enemies, but from the wild inhabitants of the forest. Indeed, the bear incident adds a touch of humor and irony to the story of the Aroostook War. It's a reminder that sometimes reality can be stranger than fiction, and that history is full of unexpected twists and turns. So, what happened next? Did this strange war escalate further? Both sides called out their militias, but would they actually go to war? A question that hung heavy in the air during the Aroostook War of the late 1830s. As the United States and the United Kingdom found themselves on the brink of another conflict, both nations summoned their militias, readying for a clash that surprisingly never transpired. The militias' involvement in the dispute escalated tensions, with the US and UK poised to defend their respective territories. The Lumberjacks, caught in the crossfire of this border skirmish, watched as the militiamen took their positions. However, despite this show of military might, the war drums remained silent. No shots were fired, no blood was spilled. It was a war where the only casualty was a bear, and the only battles were of wits and diplomacy. This brings us to the diplomatic resolution that eventually diffused the situation. Astoundingly, in a time where disputes were often settled on the battlefield, the Aroostook War was resolved through peaceful negotiations. The United States and the United Kingdom, recognizing the futility of a full-scale conflict over a matter of border demarcation, chose the path of diplomacy over warfare. In 1842, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty was signed, finally settling the border dispute between the US state of Maine and the British colony of New Brunswick. This treaty, named after US Secretary of State Daniel Webster and British diplomat Lord Ashburton, proved that even in the face of potential conflict, peaceful resolutions can be achieved. The Aroostook War, despite its name, was a war where diplomacy triumphed over aggression, where words were mightier than swords. The militiamen, initially called to arms, returned home without having fired a single shot. It was a testament to the power of diplomatic dialogue and the potential for peaceful conflict resolution. And so, the Aroostook War ended, not with a bang, but with a whisper. A whisper of diplomacy that echoed louder than any cannon fire, a whisper that marked the end of a war that wasn't and the beginning of a new chapter in US-UK relations. So, what was the aftermath of this unusual war? One may think that a war with no casualties might have little consequence, but the Aroostook War left a mark on the world map. The dispute over timber, the rival militias, and the bear incident all led to a peaceful resolution with a significant outcome: the establishment of the current border between the United States and Canada. The tension between the US and the United Kingdom, which represented the New Brunswick colony, was finally laid to rest with the signing of the Webster-Ashburton Treaty in August 1842. This treaty, named after US Secretary of State Daniel Webster and the British diplomat Lord Ashburton, successfully resolved the border dispute. The treaty drew a clear line of division, marking the boundary between Maine and New Brunswick, and extended westward along the 45th parallel. The Aroostook War, despite its name, was a war that never truly saw battle. Yet it left a lasting legacy. It stands as a unique chapter in the annals of history. A war without casualties. It was a conflict that began with the arrest of lumberjacks, escalated with the calling of militias, was punctuated by a bear incident, and ended not with a bang, but with the stroke of a pen. This unusual war serves as a stark reminder of the power of diplomacy. It highlights the potential of peaceful negotiations over brute force, of discussion over destruction. The world has seen its share of devastating wars, battles that have claimed countless lives and left deep scars. The Aroostook War, however, stands in stark contrast to these conflicts. It is a testament to the fact that not all disputes need to lead to violence, that there is always room for dialogue, and that peaceful resolution is not just a utopian ideal, but a practical possibility. The Aroostook War, a testament to the power of diplomacy and a reminder that not all conflicts need end in violence.